Hello and welcome. I am your host, Grant Johnson from Red News, and I'm here to talk about the world news for today. For today's podcast episode, I'm going to be talking about a very important topic I think that should be held on to as much as possible. Not too long ago in New York City, there was a museum that was opened in Manhattan. The museum that was built by the people that were involved in the Tiananmen Square massacre had built the museum in order to maintain the memory of what they did on June 4th, 1989. If you go to the museum, or at least see images of the museum online, you can see countless different items that were at the event itself or are strongly associated to the massacre. This museum currently is the only one that fully encapsulates all the different items and the proper information about the massacre itself. There was one that was in operation in China, but it was unfortunately raided in 2021 by Chinese police that were effectively silencing any form of discussion or acknowledgement about that massacre, that the people that saw it on television back in 1989 were horrified to see Chinese police beating and detaining those protesters that were simply protesting to have their freedom of speech and overall freedoms of self-expression. Since that bloody massacre in 1989, some of those protesters came to the United States for the freedoms and privileges that American citizens take for granted in the country. If you do talk to the people that were involved in that whole situation, they will most likely tell you that the importance of maintaining freedom does come at the cost of lives. There will be people that will completely sacrifice their lives just to make sure that other people have their freedom, so that they can express their thoughts without being censored or having a bullet in their head from their own government. That type of example isn't just for the people from China who had fled from that whole situation, but there are plenty of other people across the world who have dealt with similar instances where they had to flee from their own countries just because of different problems, from economic issues or their governments deciding to take militant action against their own people. This museum was opened before June 4th to commemorate it. However, nationalistic individuals from China and those who are completely dismissive of China's actions have criticized the people for even making the whole museum. Despite the criticism that those people have received, the people that were at the massacre and their descendants will continue to keep that museum alive and functioning. China could request the United States government to shut down that museum, but it seems highly unlikely for the United States to bend the knee and just essentially tell the museum owners to close down shop just because China had expressed its disliking of the museum and the people who actually run that museum. This is a very important take that I think everyone should listen to when talking about this topic. When a country does something bad, it's important to own up to that mistake, or to at least admit that there are problems with that country and act upon those problems and fix them. China has made it known that it will address certain issues with its economy and the country as a whole, but it will not seem to address the suppression of the Uyghur population in Western China, or the suppression of other groups like the Hong Kongers and the people of Tibet. I think the moral of the story is to make sure that the bad things that have happened in the past are now erased, and to remember those bad things and make sure that those things don't happen again, which that goes for everything in history. History has a lot of things to offer. Sometimes it can be funny, sometimes it can be beautiful, and also can be very, very ugly. I very much encourage the listeners of this podcast recording to read up on freedom fighters of history and to make sure that they can carry that rhetoric to make sure that their rights and their freedoms are protected from those who seek to take away that freedom. I will be ending today's episode on that note. If you did enjoy today's episode, please consider going to the various Red News official social media accounts. Also consider please giving this podcast a follow wherever you get your podcasts. Go to the official Red News website. Also spread the word about Red News as your news source. Thank you for listening to this podcast recording, and take care.